All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to be taking notes today on the Enlightenment, and specifically the influences of two philosophers named Montesquieu and Locke, who had a huge influence on our founding fathers in the creation of American government. So let me get my pointer tool here. All right. So, what is the Enlightenment? This is something that you should write down on the left-hand side of your Cornell notes. You're going to want to write down the Enlightenment on the left-hand side of your Cornell notes. And on the right, you can write down Age of Reason, an era from the 1620s to 1780s that emphasized reason, analysis, and individualism. So you can shorten that definition down a little bit. But again, I would write down an era from the 1620s, 1780s that emphasized reason, analysis, and individualism. So what the Enlightenment was this really kind of a cultural, intellectual movement in Europe during this time period, where instead of focusing on being told what to do by kings or the Catholic Church or religion, they made decisions and wrote books and papers based on reason, science, math, logic, and really focusing on those type of things, kind of like a Renaissance. And for civics purposes, what you really need to know is the Enlightenment. There were many political philosophers writing ideas about government that had a huge influence on the people that would eventually end up creating our government. Okay, so, go away. Okay, these were just some of the main things of the Enlightenment. Again, this big emphasis on reason, using like logic and science and math to solve problems. And again, a big emphasis on what is the purpose of government, what should good government do, and that had a big influence on our founding fathers. Okay, this is incredibly important. This is 100% guaranteed to be on your EOC. Not many topics can I say that, but I can say that for this one. So on the left of your Cornell notes, if you could write down John Locke and natural rights, you need to know this idea. So John Locke is probably the most influential of the Enlightenment thinkers. And John Locke, matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson had a picture of John Locke right here, this beautiful man right here. He had a picture of him in his home, and he pretty much plagiarized straight from John Locke when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. So these ideas of John Locke, written a long time before we became a country, really influenced what our country became. And one of his ideas was natural rights. So you need to write this down on the left, and on the right, you can write down the definition here by this bullet point. Natural rights, also referred to as natural law, are the ideas that everyone has a right to life, liberty, and property. And you need to know those three things. John Locke's natural law or natural rights are the ideas that you have a right to life, liberty, and property. And you see that here, life, liberty, and property. And what his idea is that everyone is born with these rights. Government does not give them to you. No one gives them to you. As a human being, you have the right to life, your freedom, and property, and that no one, no king or no government, can take these things away from you. And this is a very important idea. Matter of fact, if you know about the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson called these inalienable rights, but he said, we have this in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson called them inalienable rights, and he called it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But he copied this idea that we have these fundamental rights to these, copied these straight from John Locke. So you need to know natural rights or natural law, or life, liberty, and property. Okay, so John Locke had another idea. So you need to write this down on the left. John Locke and the social contract. So write that down on the left. So this idea is a little bit more confusing, but this idea is that we enter into a contract with government. And like any contract, both sides have to give up something and they get something in return. So if I sign a cell phone contract with AT&T, I give them money, they give me cell phone service. Now, what was really important about this social contract is he says that if the government's not doing their part in the contract, you can get rid of that government. Just like if I'm not paying AT&T, they're going to get rid of my service. If they're not giving me good cell phone service, I'm going to get rid of AT&T. And so what John Locke's social contract says is that we enter into a contract with government. And here's the deal we enter in with government. We give up some of our rights to complete freedom. We give up our right to do whatever we want. And we agree to follow government and obey the laws of government. That's what we give up. But in return, government is supposed to protect our natural rights. they are supposed to protect our life, liberty, and property. Now, what is really important here is John Locke says if government fails to protect our natural rights, if they don't hold up their end of the contract, just like AT&T would cancel my phone, if government doesn't protect our natural rights, then people have a right to overthrow that government, that people should get rid of that government. So again, the contract is I agree to obey the law, and government agrees to protect my life, liberty, and property. And if government's not doing that, we should get rid of that government and find a government that will. This is hugely influential to our founding fathers, who felt like their life, liberty, and property were being taken away from the King of England, were being taken away from Great Britain. And this idea of a social contract is what we use to justify the Declaration of Independence and our Revolutionary War. So this is a very important idea. Here's a great example of what Locke's social contract is. So we, the people, we give power to government. That's the idea in Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. He calls that the consent of the governed, that we give power to government. Not the other way around. Government doesn't give us power. We give power to government, and we agree to follow the law. But in return, government is supposed to give us protection. They're supposed to protect our life, liberty, and our property. So we give power and we agree to obey the law. In return, we are supposed to get life, liberty, and property protected. And what he says is just like if we don't agree to obey the law, government would punish us. If government doesn't protect our life, liberty, and property, we should get rid of that government. So again, a picture of social contract there, people shaking hands. Okay, so like I said, John Locke, hugely influential. How did he influence Thomas Jefferson, who wrote our Declaration of Independence? He called them natural rights and life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson called them unalienable rights and called it life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. John Locke called it social contract, meaning we give power to government in return for protection of our natural rights. Thomas Jefferson called that consent of the governed. John Locke called it life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson called it life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But this idea of natural rights or natural law and social contract, two really important ideas that you need to know. I'm sorry, back here on this one, if you were taking Cornell notes, this should have gone on the left, and then this should have gone on the right. Forgot you were taking Cornell notes, sorry. Okay, nothing that you need to write here on these slides necessarily. Okay, so Baron de Montesquieu, another Enlightenment philosopher, had a super important idea. So go ahead and put Baron de Montesquieu on the left and put this on the right. He believed that government power should be divided into branches, separation of powers. That's the idea you need to know, separation of powers. This idea that power should not be concealed within one person. They should be divided up into different branches. And so on the left, you should have put Baron de Montesquieu. On the right, you should have said government should be divided into branches, separation of powers. Again, separation of powers is this idea that power is separated, that not one person makes, enforces, and judges the laws, but different branches do that. And he did call for 3 branches of government. So each branch of government should be able to limit the power of the other 2 branches, creating a balanced government. You might want to put that on the right too. That's that idea of checks and balances. So if you know anything about American government, it's divided into 3 branches. We have checks and balances. We stole this from Montesquieu and wrote it in our Constitution. It's how the entire American democracy is organized. So Montesquieu on the left, and you should put this and this on the right. I think I have a picture here. So again, here's the example of separation of powers, that we have a judicial branch, a legislative, and executive branch. Powers divided among the different branches. Again, separation of powers divides government into independent branches that are balanced. Here's a famous quote from Montesquieu. He said, when the legislative and executive power are united in the same person or in the same body, there can be no liberty. What he's saying is that when the same person makes and enforces the laws, you cannot have freedom. Because if I get to make the law and enforce it and judge it, I can do whatever I want. I can make whatever law I want. I can judge that law. I can enforce that law. I can do whatever I want. So that is why he wanted power to be divided up into different branches. Someone can make the law, a different person can enforce it, a different person can judge it. And that's exactly what our government has. Again, Montesquieu's writing this at a time when England and Europe is ruled by kings that can do whatever they want. And he's saying that you cannot have freedom under a king, that government should be divided into different branches of government or separation of powers. So please Please, for your EOC, whenever you see Montesquieu, instantly think of separation of powers, that government is divided into different branches with different powers that can keep each other controlled. He did call for 3 branches of government. So on the right-hand side, or maybe on the left-hand side, write separation of powers and then write this down on the right-hand side. You should know this. He called for the legislative to make the laws, executive to enforce, and judicial to interpret. And that's exactly what our government has. So you want to write this somewhere in your notes as well. The 3 branches of government, which is called separation of powers. Okay. So I think I'm missing there. There's our separation of powers. So Congress makes the laws. The judicial branch, led by the Supreme Court, would judge whether those laws are fair, and then the president is responsible for enforcing those laws. Okay, I think that's it for notes. This is just kind of a review. Make sure you know John Locke is natural law, life, liberty, property, social contract. Government's supposed to protect our rights. In return, we obey government. And if they don't do that, you get rid of that government. This influenced the Declaration of Independence heavily. And then Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers and checks and balances influenced our Constitution and what would become American democracy. Okay, I think that is it. Boop. Make sure that you took notes. Oh boy, I don't know. These notes should be on page 17. And also attached to this assignment are my Cornell notes that you can cut out and glue onto page 18. And we will go over this more in class. All right, I'm done. Make sure you know that. All very important stuff.